Knowing how to seed start means that you get a jump start on growing in the spring, and for some climates, seed starting is the only way that we can grow certain crops. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we are just too cool and have too short of a growing season in the summer for me to be able to plant things like peppers and tomatoes direct sown by seed out in the garden. I just wouldn't get a harvest. And knowing how to seed start is also going to save you a lot of money, because a little packet of seed is much, much cheaper, or the whole packet of seed, I should say, is about the same price, if not less, of what you would get when buying one start. And in this current weird pandemic situation that we still seem to find ourselves in, being able to go out to nurseries and finding starts in the spring may not always be an option, or can be a little bit difficult. So this is the year that seed starting is going to be really important. But in order to be successful at seed starting, there's a couple of key things that you need to know. And the first thing is what your last average frost date is in the spring. Because with seed starting, if you plant seeds too early, they're going to be too large, and you're going to have to try to keep them indoors and alive, and they're going to get too big before you can plant them out where they will survive. Or vice versa, if you don't start them soon enough, then they aren't going to be big enough in order to produce a harvest before your killing frosts come in the fall. So you can Google it and you type in your zip code, and you'll be able to find what your last average frost date is in the spring. So I find it the most helpful is to just grab a calendar and mark down what your last average frost date is. So I'm just going to put it down here, my last frost date. And then you want to move over to a seed starting and planting chart. Now, if you have a copy of my book, The Family Garden Plan, or the Family Garden Planner, you already have access to these charts. And if you don't happen to have a copy yet, I'm going to give you a copy of this chart for free. So you can grab that at melissaknorris.com/seed starting, or you'll also see it in the video description below here. But don't go grab it quite yet, because you want to get through the rest of these tips in order for success. So not every plant should be seed started. In fact, some plants do not do well with seed starting indoors and should only be direct sown for your best success. So this is really true for bean plants as well as corn plants. They really don't like to have their roots messed with. And I typically don't start anything by seed indoors if it's a root, except for onions, because onion seeds, when done by actual tiny little seed, not the onion starts that most people use, those have to be started the earliest of all of your seed starting different crops. But most of my root crops I don't even bother with, even in my cool climate. I just direct sow those. So you're going to want to go through, and based upon the crops that you obviously plan on planting, you go down the list and you are going to count backwards when to start it indoors. And it's going to be, for basil, if I'm seed starting this indoors, I want to start it 4 to 8 weeks before my last frost date. So that's when I come here to my calendar, and I'm just going to count backwards 8 weeks. So I know March 5th is when I need to start my basil. So I'm just going to write here, indoors, March 5th. So your cool weather crops that can tolerate and survive some frosts, you're going to be starting much earlier, because you can plant them out earlier than your warm weather crops. So for example, with our broccoli, you can plant outside your seed starts 2 weeks before the last frost. So that means I need to look, I can actually plant them out April 16th, 2 weeks before my last average frost date. And that means I need to seed start them 7 weeks prior. So I'm going to count all the way back. Which is going to put me at March 12th. So after you've went through each crop that you plan on seed starting indoors based on if it's a good candidate or not, and then figuring out those exact dates based upon your climate, then we need to move on to what you need in order to successfully seed start and grow those plants. So now that we know our dates and exactly when we are going to be starting what, we need to talk about proper seed starting supplies. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is our soil. So when you are seed starting, you want to make sure that you're not grabbing soil out of the garden. You want to be buying I have had fine luck using a store-bought potting mix. There is actual seed starting soil mixes, so you can use that too. I always buy organic. So this is an OMRI listed, which means it is for organic use, even though it doesn't say certified organic. That is one that I look at. One of my other brands that I really like to use of potting soil is Fox Farm. So if you have seen my tomato seed starting video, then you've saw me use Fox Farm. And I also, Costco, which they don't have it quite yet because it's a little bit too early for my area for most of my seed starting, but Costco also carries a large container, or excuse me, a huge large bag, which is what I'll get when I do the majority of my seed starting. That has been the cheapest place that I have found for purchasing organic potting soil. Now, if you are like, I do not want to purchase any type of potting soil, you can purchase individual things and make your own potting soil, but you do need to make sure that it is sterilized, because baby seeds, when we are seed starting them indoors, we are creating a fake environment. So we don't have the airflow, the soil is not in the ground so that it has a natural flow of it. It's much easier for it to get compacted. And so you want to be using a light, sterile potting mix so that you don't have insects as well, because trust me, I didn't believe all the advice in the beginning, and I just went and got soil out of my garden and I brought it inside, and then I had little gnats hatched and were flying all over the house. I had all kinds of bugs. Just trust me on this one. You want to use the sterile potting soil for a lot of reasons, but mainly to keep the bugs out of your house and also to keep your little baby plants healthy. And it's sterile, meaning that it doesn't have any disease in it. So fungal disease is most primary, especially with young seedlings, because they're very susceptible to a disease called dampening off. And that's when your seeds are growing, they've germinated, you've got all kinds of little baby seedlings, they look absolutely phenomenal. And then the next day they're just like all dead, or they die off really rapidly. That's usually from a fungus called dampening off, and it means that you did not start with sterile soil to begin with. So now that we've covered our soil, let's talk about containers. And this is where you can save a lot of money. I rarely buy seed starting containers. I like to just use what I have on hand. So I have a blog post that has all the different kind of containers that you can use, but egg cartons can work very well. And this is just in the germination phase where we're just starting the seeds, because obviously there's not a whole lot of space here. So this is for just when we're starting them. One of the caveats I'll give you about egg cartons though is they are porous, and so they will absorb quite a bit of moisture. They dry out faster, so you have to keep an eye on them, and you will have to mist and water your seeds a lot more frequently if you're using an egg carton, but it can be a great way to go. Another thing that I like to do is I like to reuse any type of plastic containers. These work really well because they are deep enough. I've used like apple clamshell containers. This is an old, a baby spinach container, lettuce containers. These are nice though because it's deep enough to allow some type of root development. And the main part is it has this hinged lid. So when we're first potting our seeds, we're gonna fill this with potting soil and you're gonna put your seeds in there, but we need to keep it moist, because if seeds dry out, then they're not going to germinate and you've stopped them from growing. So we're gonna create a mini greenhouse environment, and with this type of a container, all you have to do is shut the lid and you'll immediately see condensation build up, and it keeps it the perfect moisture level. You still need to check it because you don't want it to dry out, but you don't have to water it nearly as often. Now, as soon as those seeds sprout and begin to grow, then that's when we need to have some airflow. So if you are using something like this, obviously it doesn't have a lid on it, and that's when I'll use plastic wrap and put that on top to help trap the moisture in there and to create that nice little environment. But these both work really well, and I use these for the majority of my seed starting. Now for tomatoes, which is the thing that I start probably the most of, so here I have got a Mr. Stripey that I will be doing this year. And then I do a lot of the San Marzano Lungo. I usually do about 30 San Marzano Lungo, which is my paste tomato plants. I plant about 30 seeds, knowing that I want to have at least 20 of these plants in order to fulfill all of my paste tomato needs for all of my canning and just our tomato sauce, salsa, all those year round. I know that's about how many I need. So when I'm sowing, I know that my germination rate with tomatoes is really high. Almost all of my tomato seeds will germinate, but I will sow a few extra. So usually what I will do is with something this small on here, I'll do sometimes 1 to 2, usually just 1 because this is so small, and then I can do quite a bit in here. Because you have a shorter window on your seed starting so that it's not too early or too late, I like to put in double the amount of seeds usually, and that way if only half of them germinate, I've still met the needs that I need to make sure that we have enough to take us through the whole year of all of those crops, and I don't have to then do a whole nother batch and get behind by 2 weeks on my seed starting, because most of your seeds will take anywhere from 7 up to 14 days to germinate, so it can be up to 2 weeks before you know if all of them are germinating, which just simply means they're actually sprouting and beginning to grow. So that's why if you plant double the amount of seeds of what you actually want, and then if they all germinate or almost all of them germinate, you just have extra, so you can choose to thin them out and just keep the healthiest plants or the ones that are the largest, or you could be a really nice neighbor and friend and you can give the excess away to other people. So after you have your containers all filled with your soil and you've got your seeds in there and you have it watered, because we know we need to keep them moist, then you want to put them in a warm spot. So for some people, that could be the top of your refrigerator. As we know, heat rises and the top of appliances can be warm. It can be near a heater vent, now not on, but I like to take mine, and this is during germination only, and I put them next to our fireplace. So this whole area I will just have lined with all of my seed starting trays, and that way they're right by the fire and they're nice and warm. And you don't actually need light when your seeds are germinating. They don't need light until they have sprouted leaves and they actually have their first set of true leaves, which is the second set of leaves. So when all of your seeds sprout, almost all of them have a leaf pattern that looks identical to the other, but we know that most plants, we can identify them by the differences in their leaf patterns. So it's that second set of leaves that are actually their true leaves, and that's why you'll actually see the second set will have jagged edges. If it's a tomato, if it's kale, it'll be curly. If it's cabbage, it'll mimic those characteristics. Once it reaches that point, then they do need to have light, and you'll want to be putting them under a grow light for most climates. Most climates, a windowsill, even at southern exposure and sunny, is not strong enough to grow really strong and hardy seedlings. And once your plants have sprouted, so you'll look and you'll see the seeds and you've got little green things growing up and you can see that they're starting to sprout, that's when you'll want to uncover them, and that's when airflow becomes important. And once they've sprouted, then you can move them away from your heat source. So after mine have sprouted, I will uncover them. You still want to make sure that you're keeping them watered, and then I'll move them to where I have my grow light set up to continue the process until it's time to harden them off and plant them out in the garden. So to see that entire setup and what that looks like, make sure that you check the How to Seed Start and Grow Tomato Seedlings Indoors. So go and grab my seed starting chart so you know exactly when to start your seeds. And if you're trying to decide how much to plant, you can get my How Much to Plant Per Person chart for free as well. Those links will be below the video for you.